All right, we're here for a special emergency Salt City Hoops video chat because the Utah Jazz on a quiet Monday afternoon decided who needs free agency? Let's just swing early. Let's make everybody delete or at least seriously revise their half written Jazz fit free agents drafts, or at least make me revise mine. Um, the Jazz made a fairly significant acquisition today via trade, several days ahead of the official start of free agency, getting a guy they've been linked to for some time in John Collins, previously of Atlanta. Um, we're going to talk about that trade. We're going to talk about how much it changes their reality in the immediate term. We're going to look at kind of the contract situations and, for lack of a better word, grade the trade, even though I personally hate grading trades. We'll talk about the resulting cap situation and the impact on rotation and what the Jazz still have to do to get their roster ready for this fall. To do all of that, I'm joined by my usual partner in crime and my brother. I'm Dan Clayton, the managing editor of Salt City Hoops. Ken Clayton is joining me today on this Salt City Hoops video podcast, whatever we call these things. How you doing, Ken?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Keeping cool down here in the toasty, warm state of Arizona.
I know, and as is usually the case when we get together to do podcasts and vodcasts and whatever else, um, I am like not sick, but like mildly under the weather, and you know, so we'll do our. I'll try to manage through this. You might get to you might be doing more of the talking this time around, Kenneth. But so yeah, I mean we can jump in on it. The Jazz today make a trade. Um, they send Rudy Gay, who probably was not a huge piece of the future anyway, and a second round pick. We've gotten more details about that second round pick. We'll get into that. A second round pick that may or may not convey, but if it does convey it, it actually means it's a good second round pick. Um, to the Atlanta Hawks for John Collins, who it feels like we've been talking about John Collins for months, Ken, because we've done podcasts like this one. I did Who Says No episodes where I analyzed, it feels like a half dozen different John
Right.
Collins scenarios, because we've known for a while that John Collins was a possibility for the Utah Jazz, and now he's finally a member of that club. So what's your initial reaction, your take on the trade?
Well, I mean, broadly, not a huge surprise. Just because, like you said, we've known they were flirting for a long, long time. We've been hearing that obviously at the trade deadline last offseason, possibly goes back even farther than that. So I feel like this was not a shocker. The timing was a little surprising, although I had tweeted a couple times in the last few days that this week could be a very abnormal draft to June 30th period because teams, in this case, the Atlanta Hawks, might be wanting to go ahead and get their moves done to clear their cap sheet under the old rules. Now, that's not what happened here. This deal won't actually be done until July 6th because the Jazz won't have the cap space, and there's some reasons for the Hawks as well. But we'll probably dig deeper later. So not a surprise. The timing did
Yeah.
take me off guard. Uh, my son Chad texted me, and you DM'd me as I was on my way to the office. I did see it at a traffic light and quickly tried to figure out what was going on. Your DM, by the way, was very enigmatic. You said something like, "Well, there's a thing," and I was like, "Oh crap, what was the thing?" And Chad's was
Well,
also
it's
enigmatic. Chad said they didn't even get a bag of chips for John Collins, but I didn't know who the trade partner was. I just knew John Collins that was on the
yeah,
move. Yeah,
who was sending the not bag of chips.
exactly.
Well, I just these days it's not, with uh, occupational realities and whatnot. It's not that
Yeah.
often that I beat you to Jazz news as it breaks. So I was, yeah, I wasn't sure if you had seen it. So then I followed up my DM with a text, and you were like, "Yeah, lay off. I get it." Um,
Yeah, that's what I said.
and yeah, and here we are. So so yeah, you referenced, obviously there's new salary cap rules. that go into effect. Some of them go in on July 1st. Some of them get phased in over the next couple of seasons.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think as much as that, I think some teams just kind of want to know before the evening of June 30th
Yeah.
which set of exceptions they're dealing with, because that changes not just like what you
Right.
can offer, but who's going to answer your phone call in the first place. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some financially motivated deals over these next few days. Um, in the Jazz's case, obviously they came into this off season with the ability to create a lot of cap space. They still can. We'll get to that. I guess for me, the starting point for me, um, just as I analyze this, and I'm interested to start with you and just kind of take apart this trade in terms of its impact to the Jazz and where they're heading. Obviously, the Jazz missed the playoffs last year. It looked for a long time like they could like they could potentially make it if they didn't want to offload their guys or at least be in the play-in range. Then, of course, they did offload some veterans and kind of go the other direction, and that's how they wound up with the ninth pick in the draft and got Taylor Hendricks last week. Um, I um, so I guess using that as a baseline, I am just curious to kind of hear how much you think adding John Collins, who's a good basketball player. I mean, John Collins not that long ago was averaging like 21 and 8 for the Atlanta Hawks. The last couple of years, he's been utilized a little less. The ball's been in Trey Young's hands more. They've added other pieces, and so he hasn't been quite that glamorous in terms of counting stats. But based on everything you know about John Collins, is this like a move that accelerates the timeline or just makes the Jazz a little more interesting while they kind of slowly build towards getting back to that contender status?
Two sides to that answer because I will, to anybody who's been following our podcasts and perhaps my tweets for a long time, I've never been super duper high on John Collins. However, the answer to your question is I do think that it signals a different outlook on the team going into this next season. You and I were DMing just yesterday about some of the lofty aspirations we were reading about on Twitter, and I just couldn't see it. A team with, we were going through the names, obviously three rookies, and then people were tweeting out and saying, yeah, but they've also got, and they were listing players. And after about two players, I felt like there were a lot of asterisks. Um, Ochai Obaji, maybe he'll pick up right where he left off last year, but that me that's a question mark. Um, and after him, will Kelly Olynyk be there? I'm not expecting a ton out of Simone Fontecchio. I'm not expecting a ton out of Taylor Horton Tucker, different than what he gave last year if he's here. Jordan Clarkson is a question mark as far as whether he'll be here as well. So to me, I was really having a dicey proposition of where I would have put the Jazz win total. That said, on June 25th yesterday, I was not guessing a Jazz win total. There's a lot of offseason left to go. So
Right.
I was, whatever that number might have been if I had done it yesterday, I think the number today is higher because not just because of John Collins, but this move does signal to me it takes away one of the unknowns and we start to see the Jazz tipping their hand as to where they're going. It looks like they are going to want to add obviously one, maybe other competitive NBA ready basketball players to the team. And so that there won't be a reliance on a Taylor Horton Tucker, an Ochai, a Fontecchio, or any of or the rookies, or that there will be a reliance on them once they, have shown that they can handle that.
Right. It's not a bad thing at all to tell you know, a con- six players who are first or second year players going into this season. As of
Yeah,
today, that's not counting the two ways, six guys who are going to be
yeah,
in their rookie season or coming off their rookie season. It's not a bad thing to tell those guys you will play when you have shown that you have surpassed this guy who is playing, right? Or
yeah.
you know, And I think Hendricks will get minutes. I think Keontae George will get minutes. I think Bryce Sensabaugh might have, might have to fight his way from 11 or 12 deep into minutes, and
Yeah.
that's okay. I agree with you. So one of the things that we've heard a lot about in terms of figuring out how competitive the Jazz are going to try to be in 23-24 is that outstanding OKC pick.
Mm.
Um, and I know that our guy Tony Jones of the Athletic, he's all along said, I think his direct quote was that the 2024 draft is um, or something colorful like that, and that the 2025 draft is strong. So the Jazz might want to surrender their pick next year by getting it outside of the top 10, um, and then they'd have their pick back. Or sorry, they might want to convey it. Is that what I said? They might want to go ahead and convey it
Yeah.
in next year by having it outside the top 10 so that they can keep their pick in 2025. The other thing that I've been thinking about, and I don't know that a lot of people are really catching on to how important this is. If they don't convey their pick next year because they're in the bottom 10 of the NBA post lottery, um, then they only have 1 year to
Hmm.
get outside of that bottom 10 and convey in 2025 before it impacts that really valuable 2026 pick that is going to be the most. If they have a pick, it's going to be the most valuable of Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah. But if they don't own a pick, then it turns to nothing. So I know that the Jazz have kind of internally ranked the value of all the draft picks that they have coming their way,
Right.
and I know that they value that pick very highly, probably as highly as any pick other than their own pick that they just drafted ninth. That's a pick that a lot of different ways you can find yourself selecting a really good player with that pick, but only if you have in 24 or 25 gone ahead and conveyed that pick to OKC. So um, I'm not sure that as an organization they want to go into the 24-25 season you know, thinking, hey, if we're not 11 through 30, we just really screwed up a positive asset that we
Yeah.
fought hard to get. So that's another reason to keep in mind why maybe it's not the worst thing to go ahead and start the climb as early as this upcoming season.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I agree, and at times I haven't because there's kind of this, in my mind, this reason to want to even it out, and that's what I've seen today or the last few days on Twitter, as Tony has talked about the Jazz. He's reporting want to convey the pick in 2024 because there is a mindset that makes sense that you want to even things out. Why not take one in 24 and two and still have two left in 25? Well, that's fine if every draft is considered equal. But if the drafts are not considered equal, plus you've got that risk assessment too of not getting close to 2026, I think it's probably wise. I'm not enough of a draft expert at all, as we both said on everything we've ever done, um, to evaluate at this point what a draft that's 1 year away is compared to a draft that's 2 years away. I can barely evaluate a draft the day before it happens. So I can't, but that seems to be the the idea is that the 24 draft isn't strong, or at least it isn't as strong as the 25. So take the no picks unless they add one, take the three picks in 25, and then you've got your swap rights intact for 2026, and you're taking the best of three teams' picks.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I mean, weak draft or strong draft, whatever. Like we're all gonna on June whatever of next summer, there are gonna be guys that we like, like
Hmm.
there. You know what I mean? We as you and as Ken and Dan, we as Jazz Nation, like the organization is gonna have got. So even in a weak draft, I get that like you always want guys. But the other thing I would just add to what you just shared is like the whole let's even it out philosophy probably applies best if you assume that most of the guys picked are going to wind up on your roster. And I just think mathematically that's an impossibility given the number of picks Utah has.
Right.
So I think it's more about, timing the assets to maximize value because I think that's where the Jazz are in the project. Although again, and that's why we're talking about it. Maybe this John Collins thing signals that they're not they're not exactly in the project where we thought they were. Although, look, I and we can use this to kind of pivot back to talking about John himself and what he brings. Like, I don't think the Jazz view him as like someone who alters the way you play by any stretch of the imagination. He's a very, very skilled offensive player. They've been excited about that clear back to when obviously they were considering this option at the trade deadline. Um, they also, I think, they recognize that he has certain defensive limitations that limit
Mhm.
some of the ways you can use him on defense, and that's one of the reasons why I don't think the Jazz were ever going to part with a first round pick in a John Collins trade. Um, I think I think there's a version of this deal that could have gotten done in February um, that involved a first round pick, or even if they keep the pick, there's a version that would have involved players because at that point the Jazz would have had to get close on salary, so you would have had to include some of these guys that you used later to go get a pretty valuable Lakers pick or a pick,
Mhm.
a high upside Lakers pick. So I do think it's good that they waited, but yeah, I don't the Jazz are still a team with a lot of, you know, solid non-star starters or second tier stars. And they still don't have kind of, for lack of a better word, the guy. Um, and until they figure that out, I still think it's a little, at best, I think you're talking like 2012 Denver vibes when Carmelo Anthony had left, and there's this really interesting group of players, and there's not a singular star, but they still have a lot of success and make some magic happen. But then, really, all that did for that era's Denver is kind of delay the inevitable. And I'm not saying that that's what the Jazz are lining themselves up to do, because the Jazz are also entering this phase with a dozen draft picks, tradable contracts, young guys that are showing promise on rookie contracts. So the Jazz have a lot of ways to go get that guy. Um, but I don't know. I guess to anybody asking if John Collins by himself is going to change the Jazz's reality, I think I'm with you. Um, it's a move forward. It definitely is going to increase their win total by X next season, but I don't think it suddenly elevates the Jazz to like the Denver Nuggets aren't sitting there going as they prepare for their title defense. Oh crap, the Jazz added who? Like
Yeah.
I think it's still going to need some time to congeal, and they're going to have to find that A1 level star at some point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So you mentioned the draft
All right.
pick that maybe at the trade deadline there was an opportunity to either give up a pick or maybe the Jazz were even asking for a pick to take on the additional salary, and that didn't happen. But the Jazz did end up sending a second round pick, and as you alluded to, we got some more information about that pick today. Do you want to go into that, and we'll chat about that a little bit for those who haven't seen it on Twitter by the time they watch this?
Yeah, so it's a Memphis pick that in 2026, if Memphis is bad, basically, if the pick is 31 through I think 42 in the second round,
Hmm.
then the pick conveys to Utah, and in which case they'd pass it along to Atlanta to
Right.
satisfy this trade. If it's not in those first 12 spots of the second round of the 2026 draft, then as far as I understand it right now, the debt is extinguished and the Jazz got John Collins for effectively free. I honestly for better than free because it also helped them erase a $6.5 million commitment to Rudy Gay, who I'm sure they weren't thrilled about paying $6.5 million to, assuming his production is going to stay where it was last season.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, it's hard to complain about the trade. Now, Memphis has some question marks. Their stars going to be suspended for 25 games. There's lots of, there's moving parts. There's you know, a second apron coming that's going to function like a, hardish cap. And so, like, is it out of the realm of possibility that Memphis could be bad in 3 years and suddenly that pick is a really valuable second round pick? I mean, sure, but seconds are kind of to me second round picks are kind of just like cash. Like you can go get a second round pick whenever you want to. So, you know, I'm not super worried about if that pick does convey. Um, what I will say is this, and just since you harkened back to the February discussions, um, I think there was a point in time where where it felt like this deal was going to happen in February. Um, Again, the Jazz were going to have to involve players.
Yeah.
I don't think they were going to send a pick in that version of the trade. Then what happened is Atlanta had a front office changeover, and as is often the case, a new group of front office, especially when those front office professionals are former players, right? A group of former players shows up and says, "Hey, we think we can sort of revive this situation with John Collins. We think we can breathe some life into his career and make him feel more appreciated and valued, even though his role has changed since when he was a 20-8 guy." And so the trade kind of evaporated from that standpoint. But for what it's worth, I had someone say to me back then, um, like, Dan, we can probably make this trade in the summer if we want to, and then they did. So I just think that goes to show that when we get all emboldened and we sharpen our pitchforks because the Jazz did something or didn't do something, like, you know, there's time is a flat horizon, and there's plenty of opportunities later to do what you might or might not do today because the timing isn't right or the assets aren't right or whatever. And if the Jazz had done that deal in February, they're not currently sitting with the 2027 top four protected Lakers pick. So I think that's an important distinction as you grade why it's okay that the Jazz made the trade today versus then. Right now they have a really valuable Lakers pick, and they have a good young 25-year-old player who's shown promise. And if they'd done it in February, they'd still have that 25-year-old. They wouldn't have the Lakers pick because they needed Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt in the other deal that got them the pick.
Right. So yeah, back to the second round pick. I was just going to add on something there. It was just funny because somebody earlier today asked what second round pick do the Jazz even have? Because their second round cupboard is famously a little bare. And I replied, well, they've got the 2029 and they've got the 2030 available to them now. Or I understand as soon as the draft is over that 2030 is available to them. If not, it is by the time they make this deal on July 6th. So either way. And then I said, and I didn't think there was any chance in the world that this was the pick in question. But I said, they've also got this 2026 pick. I call it half a pick because roughly 50% of the outcomes that pick would go to Golden State to pay Golden State back for the right to uh, employ Eric Pascal for a year, and
Yep.
and if only if Memphis finishes 30 to 42 or 30 to 41, I don't have it in front of
30,
me.
30, 31 to 42, I think, because 30 would still be a
Oh
first
yeah,
round pick, right?
sorry, yeah, 31 obviously, and so it's 31 to 42. It now goes to we think um, it now goes to Atlanta. It would have stayed with the Jazz before 31 to 42. I pulled up my notes here. Um, so my thought process, even back at the deadline or whatever, was that the Jazz 40% of the pick was pretty much worthless because Memphis was a team. You may recall that John Morant wasn't worried about anybody in the West. That he was it was blue skies all the way
Yeah.
to at least the finals, right?
You had
And
Dylan Brooks poking bears. You had
right,
John not worried. Everything was great. Everything was
yeah,
glitzy in Memphis a few months ago.
yeah. So it really, if that deal is exactly how we've understood it from Tony, and there are no other protections, or it doesn't revert to something else if it doesn't convey just in the form that the Jazz have rights to it now. I mean, it's the value that pick could be part of the value to get John Collins is partly a referendum on what has happened in Memphis now. Because again, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, I would have said that pick had very, very little, near zero value. But here we are.
Well, and it's a referendum. Sorry, the glasses are going on, so people are going to get my glare reflection because I can't read these numbers without glasses. I mean, it's also a referendum on the $78.5 million still owed John Collins. And let's be clear,
Yeah,
like, his production has been well below those numbers, and that's why this deal happened. Like the Jazz, it's funny. John Collins would have been um, a perfect guy to dream about adding to the Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Quinn Snyder Jazz back when they were always looking for that big wing who could shoot and guard bigger bodies a little bit and whatever. But we didn't even talk about him back then. We talked about Harrison Barnes and we talked about Jeremy Grant. We talked about all these guys. We didn't even talk about John Collins. Why? Because talking about John Collins then just would have been silly because he was coming off his best, his best season, that 21-8 season or 20-8 season, whatever it was. He was just starting that extension, and so it was just silly to even bring up. Why would Atlanta trade a guy that's that good? Has that much upside at that age, at that size? Just starting his rookie contract extension. The reason why, not long after that era of Jazz basketball collapsed, we were sitting here talking about, oh, maybe the Jazz could get John Collins for a first, or maybe not even get a first, or maybe get a first for taking his contract, is
Mhm.
because his production is now well south of that contract. And, I think some of the people who like this trade like it because they assume that, as happened with Lowry Markkanen, the Jazz are going to go in and take this distressed asset who maybe wasn't being used as well as he could have been, and they're going to breathe some new life into him, and he's going to get back closer to what he was, before Atlanta kind of remodeled their rotation and their possession allocation. Um, and the people who don't like this deal probably don't have as much faith in that happening. And that's really, I think, where this will hang when we're analyzing this 5 years from now. But I still think the chance to take a shot like that when all it costs you is Rudy Gay, who you probably were ready to move on from anyway,
Mhm.
and a maybe second round pick. Like, this is exactly the kind of shot that a rebuilding team should take, even even if it fails spectacularly. I mean, honestly, like, John Collins could get abducted by aliens tomorrow, and the Jazz could, still be required to pay out every dollar of his contract. And when the contract was up, I'd still sit here and say, worthy gamble, like totally worthy gamble. Um, even if, like you, I'm I'm less convinced that he'll ever be what he was in that, second and third season in Atlanta.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the tweet today from Riley, Argus 11, where he had laid out some data from the cleaning the glass, where it showed the migration of where John Collins used to shoot from and where he's now shooting from. So back when his in his early years, and to be clear, this probably isn't all about coaching, but it really did change
Right.
dramatically about the time Nate McMillan was hired. It's probably partly also the player, but players often when they're younger, they get to the rim a little more. They're more athletic. They like to jump. They're they're going to get there. They're going to bang a little more, and then as they get older, although he's not that old, they're going to shy away. But the biggest thing I saw, first years at the rim, 69% of his shots, 64, 55. Now he's around 40% of his shots from the rim. So he's moved away from the rim. Now the good news is he used to shoot 7% of his shots from three, 17, 22. Now he's up to about 30% shot of his shots from three. That's good because that's similarly, you
Yep.
want to be at the rim, you want to be shooting from three. The bad news is his mid range has grown. And so that's where his effective field goal percentage has come down quite a bit. And it's still not terrible, but it's certainly not. His highs were in the 63, 61 range a few years ago, and now he's 55.7 this past season. So you'd hope if you can get a little bump
Yeah.
there, he becomes a much more effective and efficient scorer again. We'll see how that works.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So like, I was doing the same logic. I tend to use true shooting just because I do. I don't know, like, mostly because I have a better handle on like what's average in a given year on true shooting. So, his worst true shooting year was this past season at
Mhm.
593. Well, average last year was about 570. So his worst true shooting season ever was still better than the average true shooter in the NBA. His career average for true shooting is 626. So, this is a guy who certainly could clean up his shot profile. Um, he did become a bit more of just a purely a spot up shooter um, these last couple of seasons. But we're talking about a guy. I did this earlier. Let's see. I mean, over a 3-year peak from his second season through his fourth season, he averaged 19 points, 9 rebounds, only an assist and a half. And I think that's another thing that the critics will say is that someone who's going to touch the ball that much should. Same thing. I've made this point about Markkinen too.
Right.
Like if you're going to touch the ball that much, eventually you should get some assists almost by accident, right? Because
Yeah.
someone's going to flash a double at you and someone's open, and you just like that's why most guys who handle the ball a lot get like 3, 4, 5 assists minimum. Um, but anyway, yeah, during that 3-year peak, he was a 38% 3-point shooter. He was shooting 62% on twos because, as you said, it was mostly at the rim. He was getting to the line 4 times a night, which isn't a ton, but it's enough to kind of pad your average and give yourself a little bit of give yourself some easy points to get up to that almost 20-point mark. So, that's the John Collins that earned that big contract as a restricted free agent. Those were his stats going into restricted free agency in the summer of 2021
Mm-hmm.
that got him the new deal. He signed as a restricted free agent. He didn't get he didn't get an offer sheet that got matched. He just signed outright. And then he comes back and immediately he's down to 16 points on just 12 shot attempts per game. The next year, 13 points on 10 shot attempts per game. His minutes have actually been pretty steady, but again, it's more a question of just how he's been used. And then, that leads the question here to how is he going to get used in Utah when there's, Lowry Markkinen, Walker Kessler. I don't view Collins as really mostly a 5. I think Collins is pretty solidly a 4 in the NBA right now because of the defensive stuff.
Yeah.
Taylor Hendricks, if he earns a minute, if he earns a significant role, we don't know what Kelly Olynyk is up to. And I know I'm skipping ahead in our little outline, but I think that's the fair question is there enough of an opportunity? Is he going to have enough runway to get back closer to, I don't care if he's at 19-9 again, like he was for those 3 seasons combined,
Mm-hmm.
but does he get kind of halfway there? And even if he's just at like his career average true shooting, frankly, even if he's at last year's true shooting, he's still helping the Jazz every time he uses a possession. And that wasn't the Jazz's reality last season with some of the guys they were throwing possessions to, including, by the way, they're one of their top possession users in Jordan Clarkson.
Right.
So I don't know. I said a lot there. Feel free to pick any of those thoughts to react to, or tell me I'm wrong, or tell me.
No, I don't think you're wrong about any of that. I would agree. I think with everything, there was probably some minor thing in there I don't even remember what it was, but that I would disagree with just because that's my personality. I'm the
Oh,
overcorrector. So,
that's good to know about you.
yeah, well, it runs in the family, I like to say. So,
Yeah, the force is stronger with some than it is with
yeah,
others, though.
well,
So
yeah. So I think probably let's jump into maybe the contract details I mean, I guess we've kind of covered that to a certain extent. I mean, 78 million over 3 years is
yeah,
what's remaining. The third year is a player
yeah,
option, which as of today, you would imagine he would keep that. But if he's playing a little better and with the cap going up by that point in time, we're talking 2025 to 2026 season, he could opt out, but it would probably take a kind of a change in current valuation for that to happen.
yeah. I do think we're headed towards a reality where like 20 to 25 million um, is going to be, unless you're on a rookie contract, 20 to 25 million is just going to be starter money pretty soon.
Yeah.
And that's going to take a real mental shift for everybody because for a long time that was like max contract range for the young, for the youngest bracket of max contract
Hmm.
players. Um, but by the time he's making 26.6 on that final year, I think you're right. Like that's going to be a smaller percentage of the cap, and it's going to be more in line with just kind of what it takes to get a solid starter who's even capable of 19-9 or 16-8 or whatever. Um, so I mean, I do think we kind of hit this bullet on our plan because I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it kind of sounded like we were both saying like if the cost is Gay and maybe a second round, like you do
Yeah.
this trade. Like, how do you not do this trade, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We clearly talked about kind of the second half of the bullet. I just looking at the list, I hadn't
Yeah.
thought we hadn't talked quite as specifically about that. So I defer now to you to segue into the next thing that I have now. I've crashed my
No.
segue, so I will leave it to you to do it more deftly.
Well, the next thing we were going to talk about is just resulting cap situation. It's kind of excuse me. It's kind of a
Dying.
testament to the flexibility. I know, seriously, I'm sounding like Walter White in season one over here. Hopefully it ends better for me, or at least I make better decisions. So, kind of a testament to the flexibility the Jazz have created for themselves that they could absorb this contract and still be in a situation where they at minimum are going to have some cap space, but they actually still, depending on how options and guarantees go, could actually still have significant cap space. Why don't I let you talk through kind of the the
The
the big number
variables.
and the small number while I re up on cough drops and beverages.
Okay. So going into this morning, we all thought we had three player options outstanding. Um, Rudy Gay will pick up his player option in order to be used in this trade after July 1st. So that one is answered and also resolved because he will no longer be with the Utah Jazz. We are waiting for decisions on Jordan Clarkson, whether he'll pick up his 14.26 million for next year. Most, almost everybody I've seen opine on that has assumed that he would not and that he'll become a free agent. If he becomes a free agent, he has about a $20 million cap hold, and then the Jazz have to sign him for whatever they can, or he leaves as an unrestricted free agent. The other outstanding player option we have is Taylor Horton Tucker. Does he opt in and take his 11 million for his final season on his contract, or does he look for something that's either higher value or slightly less value, but tack some years onto it, either with the Jazz or elsewhere? And then on the other side, we have a team option, or no, sorry, not a team option. We have Kelly Olynyk with a non-guaranteed, partially guaranteed contract. I wouldn't spend much time talking about that. I think the Jazz are going to pick up the guarantee, which they'll do by not waiving him before Wednesday, and but then we'll see what happens later on down the road. So if you end up clearing the Clarkson and the Horton Tucker contracts, you do end up with some significant cap space too. You've also got some smaller non-guaranteed contracts that figure in as well. So I don't know which set of assumptions you want to make if you're alive over there, but I mean we're talking just
Still
the
breathing.
assumption I have up on the screen is Clarkson out, Horton Tucker in, and if we don't count the non-guaranteed guys for the moment, there's another 28 million available under the cap. Um, if we do count
Yeah.
them, it's a little less than that.
What?
So there's room to make a significant splash either in free agency or with more trades that look a little like this one, where you're just taking a problem off somebody's hands. In those cases, you might be doing it for an asset, where in this one, Collins was their problem and kind of the asset, at least from
Yeah,
the
he
Jazz
was.
perspective.
Yeah. Um, so good breakdown. I assume the 28. So does I can't see your screen. So the
Yeah,
28 million scenario is that Kelly Olynyk is in.
that's Kelly Olynyk is in at his full amount. And the only thing I've
Okay.
done is knocked out Jordan Clarkson, so and knocked out his cap hold. Um, and I've
Yep.
knocked out
So Jordan Clarkson signed somewhere else.
yeah, and I've knocked out the three smaller non-guaranteed guys. I don't think that's the Jazz plan, but if somebody was on the phone and said I'll come for 28 million and they were worth that amount of money, the Jazz could easily waive Dunn, Shamanich, and Carey and then re-sign them for the minimum afterward as long as they were amenable to that. So now that said, that sort of guy is not probably out there in free agency. That my opinion that A is available this season, B wants to come to the Jazz, and C the Jazz want. But you could be
Yeah.
surprised.
Agreed, and we can talk free agents if you want.
No,
I've been preparing my yearly like one sentence on every available free agent column, um, and even the names that are like exciting on the surface, like Fred VanVleet is an exciting name, but also the Jazz are supposedly obsessed with positional size. So how do you go out and get a 6'1" point guard, right? So
yeah,
um, now maybe they wouldn't care because he's good enough, but I guess I'm just saying like there are no obvious answers, and that's if you could even get to Fred VanVleet. Um, the other thing that I think is important is if you have 28 million in cap space, you can trade for a 28 million dollar player, or you can trade Kelly Olynyk for a $40 million player, or
yeah.
you can trade Colin Sexton for a $45 million player, almost, you know. So um, I do, by the way, agree with your Kelly Olynyk assumption. A lot of people felt otherwise today, given the fact that the Jazz keep piling up more guys who can play, you know, one forward spot or the other. Um, but I just think, you know, basically it costs you 3 million to not employ him or 12 million to employ him. And by the way, as an added benefit, if you employ him, you also keep your options open for later. And
Yeah.
as I said earlier on Twitter, like, you know, having these contracts in the teens, these stackable contracts attached to good players, like that's going to be important if the Jazz ever have a moment where they can go bid on a guy. Um, you know, we've seen scenarios, you know, like Miami last summer wanted to get in on some of these biddings, including for Donovan Mitchell, but they couldn't because, like, basically they had guys making up to like 5 million, and then they had like Duncan Robinson making 17 million, and nothing in between.
Hmm.
Um, so I do think just kind of keeping the options open with Kelly, aside from the fact that he's been pretty important culturally, and you know, maybe he'll continue to be. Maybe it'll be less so because there are more guys to soak up minutes. But I still think that there's not only a basketball role available for Kelly Olynyk in the near term, but I also think that again, it's just smart asset management to just keep that alive and see what you can do with it. Um, not even in like the medium term or long term. Like you could you could choose to keep Kelly Olynyk past the Wednesday guarantee deadline, and Thursday you could find an awesome trade that involves that 12 million in salary.
Right.
So
Right.
um, so your set of assumptions is kind of what I'm working on too. Um, and then I guess the other thing to debate or discuss is, you know, the likelihood of the Clarkson thing. Um, I do think it's a no brainer that he's going to opt out.
Yeah.
Um, I don't necessarily think it's a no brainer. I, you know, I think there's a number at which the Jazz would be comfortable keeping him. But where the Jazz are coming from on that is, if you imagine like how long it's going to take the Jazz to get back to like first tier contender status. We're probably still, even if next year is a step forward, we're probably talking about a couple years before they're really contending. Now Jordan Clarkson is in his mid 30s. He was probably, depending on how you feel about Royce O'Neal and Bojan Bogdanovic, or sorry, not Bojan, and Joe Ingles towards the end there. Jordan was probably most recently the fifth to seventh best player on a contender, you know, when the Jazz were that.
Hmm.
Um, if you fast forward 5 years from that, he's probably going to be the sixth, seventh, eighth best player on a contender when the Jazz are getting back around to it. So I think that's the reason why they don't necessarily want to pay him like he's, you know, like he is the fourth starter on a contender, because he probably won't be that. But I could see him re-signing at a more reasonable figure, just because again, then you have options with him too. But I'm not sure I feel like it's trending that way as of today. And I say that not to be cryptic. I don't know anything. And by the way, there's only a finite number of teams that can give Jordan Clarkson more than the 14.3 million he's going to opt out of.
Hmm.
Um, I just wonder, you know, for him, how much sense does it make? You can see the team sort of shifting its identity. You're probably wondering, if you're him, like how much a part of that you are, um, tomorrow and in a year and in 3 years and in 5 years. And I just I wouldn't. So yeah, short answer to all this Jordan Clarkson rambling is he's definitely opting out. Whether he whether he winds up marching or re-signing at a reasonable figure, I think is TBD. But I think I'm leaning slightly towards he might find a greener pasture somewhere.
Yeah, it's
Fair?
that's fair. I mean, just the window I keep looking at is back at the deadline we were hearing, or when he was eligible for the when they were talking extension, he was looking for 20 million a year. The maximum the Jazz could have offered him on an extension at the time was about 50, almost 52 million a year. So there's an 8 million window there. I don't, just my gut feel is the Jazz probably don't want to go to 20. They've offered the lower amount. So now he has to go to the market and see can he beat that kind of a 16, 17, 18.5 construction, which takes him to almost 52, or is that his best offer? And then the other question is just because the Jazz had that offer on the table earlier in the year doesn't mean it's on there now. I mean, I assume something like that would be, and that also assumes a 3 year. They could go a 2 year. You don't, it's just there's a lot of options, but I do think his value is
Right.
in a fairly narrow window between maybe 16 and 20. I don't think anybody takes him higher than 20. First of all, because like you said, there's only like three teams who could um, without
Yeah.
a sign and trade, and I don't know that that's going to happen. So I think there's a deal to be had, but I don't know that it will be. It's kind of the same thing you said.
Yeah. Yeah. So he's a curious case. Talon Horton Tucker, I think, would be wise to opt in. Um, his number is just a hair over 11 million. The mid-level exception this year for non-tax paying teams is going to be 12.2 million. So could he theoretically go out and shop for a little bit more than the 11? Yeah, but you have to feel pretty good about the season you just had to think that some team's going to give you the entire mid-level. So I think he should opt in. He probably will opt in. Um, I I don't it wouldn't shock me if the Jazz are not at a phase in their process where they're going to pay to offload 11 million, but I could see a scenario where he gets included in a deal. In other words, I think they might be less attached to the idea of him than some fans became after watching him just kind of bully his way to the basket for the last 40 games of the season. Um, and Andy Larson had the comment today that he would be stunned with emphatic asterisks, stunned if THT is the Jazz's starting point guard next year. I sort of agree, but for the in the interim, I think it's a safe assumption to count his 11 million as being in there. So yeah, 20 28 million is probably the number for now. Um, Again, you can make those decisions about Chris Dunn, Luka Samanic, Vernon Carey kind of along the way. Um, Especially in Dunn's and Carey's case. Samanic, you have to make a slightly earlier decision because 400,000 of his salary guarantees in mid-July. But I think by mid-July, you should probably have a pretty good idea of what your opportunities are and if you absolutely need that $2 million. So I agree with your assumptions. I think that's probably what the Jazz are looking at, which again is not enough on its own to go shopping for like you know Damian Lillard. Hashtag sarcasm. I don't think the Jazz are really in the market for Lillard. But, again, the question is, could you take that 28 million and, also ship out another player in the deal that gives you the opportunity to take back more salary? Um, and then the question just becomes, who's that next batch of stars that we don't think of today as available that might become available at some point this summer, during the season, next summer. And as is always the case, that's what we don't know about the NBA, and that's why it's glorious and unpredictable and fun to follow.
I think my best guess is the Jazz have a handful, and it's probably a fairly small handful of and we're not going to get into names, but free agents they would look at and sign maybe to a longer term deal. But for the most part, if those 3 or 5 or 6 guys don't work out, and I'm not even talking about all of them being big ones. These could be smaller deals as well. So if those don't work out, I think the Jazz pivot to use the cap space another way, either by taking in trades or eventually look at 1 year contracts. Um, so I just don't see free agency this season being the key to a huge amount of improvement unless, they just pull a diamond in the rough out of out of a free agent acquisition, like they have mostly via trade so far.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't even be sad to see them just take some more shots on some guys. You know, like think about what Denver did and just like finding Bruce Brown. And
Yeah.
I've I've been a like I can show the receipts on this. I've been a Bruce Brown guy since before he was everybody's, finals darling. Um, but you go and get a guy like that who you think could be a little better in the right circumstance, and you spend sort of exception money, and I'd be glad to see them do that. The other thing I'd say is, with the new rules around the minimum team salary, the Jazz have to be at 122 million, not by the end of next season, but by the start of next season. And unless that's one of the rules that's getting phased in. Actually, now that I say
Actually,
that out loud, I think that's one of the.
I think I was quoting that rule the other day, I think as recently as yesterday on Twitter, but I went digging and I can't find for sure that it applies this October. So,
You know what I think it is. I think it does, but I think this is the year that it doesn't cost you the full luxury tax
okay.
distribution payment. It costs you half of it.
Oh, okay.
So I will I will look that up because I know where to find that directly from the league real fast.
Okay.
Um, so if that's the case, um, yes. So if as of the first day of the regular season, a team salary is less than the minimum team salary, which this year will be around 122 million,
Hmm.
then for the 2023-2024 season, that team will lose half of their tax distribution,
Okay.
half of the money they otherwise would have gotten from the luxury tax system. Um, and the amount of the difference will be added to the team salary cap. So that'll obviously restrict them from doing other things. So this is not a year that you want to be like, you know, keeping your options open to see what comes open in a February trade. Like the Jazz kind of need to know in July, August, September how they're planning to spend that 122 million. And so the Collins deal also kind of answers that because while there's still some optionality here in terms of all these option guys and non-guaranteed guys, I think we know roughly how the Jazz could get to that number if you know if like go sign another free agent for 5 million. The Jazz will have, even if Clarkson opts in and all these other guys opt in or get their guarantees made, the Jazz still have 8 million left to spend before they hit the salary cap, and they'll have a room exception. So either way, the Jazz are going to be able to have some conversations with free agents of some tier. And I guess
Yeah.
that's my point is, and instead of spinning my wheels over Fred VanVleet or, James Harden might opt out, or Draymond Green, who I don't think fits the timeline, or some of these loftier names, like
Hmm.
I'd go try to find me another Bruce Brown level guy. And I think there are guys like that. It's just you have to decide which data points you trust and which data points you think were situational, and you could improve in a better ecosystem or a different ecosystem.
Yeah. One thing I was going to bring up too is reminded me as we're talking. We know as of today, we always probably assumed the Jazz were going to become a cap space team. We know as of today that's
Yep.
100% they will become a cap space team. So as soon as they become a cap space team, they will lose their traded player exceptions that they have on the books. However, they could, even though they're over the cap, they could use some of those this week. because on this year's books they are a cap space team now, or an over the cap team now. So that's
Right.
one little disappearing arrow they have in their quiver, or two or three of them. But as of Saturday morning, those are basically going to be gone, or irrelevant, because if you're going under the cap, you don't need traded player
Right.
exceptions. But if an opportunity comes up this week, I know every time I see a trade, one of the fanspo trades or trade machine deals on there, I start picking it apart. I think that's part of my calling in life, is to pick apart trades that people submit. And
Yeah.
just because it says green success does not mean it's a good trade. So the first thing I start doing is calculating 125% plus 100,000 or plus 5 million if it's in certain salary ranges. But the thing you got to remember right now, for the next 4 days, the Jazz have traded player exceptions. So there is an opportunity to get a player like they did today, or they could they could do that before the changeover, or they could also push it into next season
Right.
unless the other team needs to get it done on this salary cap year. They also, whether they bring back Kelly Olynyk, Taylor Horton Tucker, or even if they re-sign Jordan Clarkson, my best guess is all of those guys on their current or Jordan's new contract would be in a range that their assets going forward for the next 12 months or longer in Jordan's case. So they've got
Yeah.
all kinds of things they can do in the longer term. I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but it's a pretty good place, because you mentioned about Miami, how they didn't have any of those mid-range contracts and had a hard time making deals this last year. The Jazz have really set themselves up to have assets in kind of every level, and then they've got all the draft picks as well. So it's a good
Yep.
time right now.
Yeah. I mean, not to belabor the point, except that that's what we do. Um, John Collins today on a $25 million contract, obviously not a positive asset, or else the Jazz would have had to give up more to get him.
Right.
Colin Sexton at 17 million is probably like, a neutral to good asset.
Hmm.
Lauri Markkanen at 17 million is a ridiculously good asset, so
Yeah.
good that the Jazz aren't going to even consider trading him.
Yeah.
Jordan Clarkson, depending on the new number, Kelly Olynyk, like these are good contracts. These are like, usually when a team is trying to put together a package for a star player without detracting from their core, they're trying to pile up contracts like Duncan Robinson, and I shouldn't. I mean, I know Duncan Robinson had to find playoffs and kind of rehabilitated some of his value, but the point is, like, that's usually what's going in, is like that 11th man who barely plays, who's due eight figures, and that's not the Jazz's reality. They have some good players attached to these salary figures in the teens. Um, I don't, not to do some on-air producing here, but how long are we even, Ken? Should we
We're
put this one in the can? I know we had like, go ahead.
we're at 58 minutes. If we put this one in the can, it's a record. But that's fine too. If we're
Whew.
yeah,
Well, I mean, the only
that's a
other
record
outstanding
low,
thing
by
is
the way, for those who don't understand what I'm saying
yeah.
here.
I understood.
I
I
know you
understood.
did.
Um, the only other thing we kind of didn't get to is obviously like the impact on the rotation, and maybe it's premature to go there anyway, because the Jazz still have a free agency period, and they still have the possibility of doing more deals. Um, I guess what interests me most there, but this can be a topic for another day, is obviously they just acquired three rookies and introduced them today, minutes after this news broke, which I was
Yeah.
curious timing on the Woj bomb coming out while literally while those guys are walking to the dais. But um, the impact on Keontae George, Bryce Sensabaugh, but especially Taylor Hendricks is something that interests me. Doesn't worry me because
No.
again, I think it's okay for players to earn their minutes, um, but I think obviously we have a different idea than we did 24 hours ago in terms of what role Taylor Hendricks is walking into.
Yeah. I mean, for the moment, and we've talked several times or several minutes about Kelly Olynyk's future. The near future is he'll become fully guaranteed, is my guess, is our guess. And then
Yeah,
the next step we'll see. But assuming he's around, the Jazz have 5 players for basically a front court, a 3 position front court rotation. That's
Yep.
not that's not like crazy. Um,
Abnormal. Yeah.
yeah, for a team, especially that is trying to be competitive. Um, Taylor Hendricks still has to show that he can make the jump and do it in this league at this level. But let just for now we'll assume that he can, and or at least that the growing pains aren't too difficult, and he can. That's 5 people to play 144 minutes at the 3, 4, and 5. I think that's pretty good. And then you've got a few guys who can come in and do spot duty. Damian Jones, if he sticks around, Simone Fontecchio. Um, if you get Bryce Sensabaugh minutes at the 3 versus at the 2, so you just depending on what you got, and then the other players, those guys are waiting for their opportunities to come in. But 5 players to divide up those 144 minutes, not a problem for me. And in fact, like I said, getting that presumably 30-ish minutes from John Collins that I found out we had received this morning kind of actually makes me feel like, oh yes, the Jazz are going to be competitive. They're not going to be, you know, trying to do this with a bunch of first and second year players. Are you muted?
I sure am.
Yes.
That's what happens when I'm coughing. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I agree with you. I think now you have fewer guys. You're going to be relying on fewer guys now that you're going, oh, wow, I hope he's ready for that. Right.
Yeah.
And I know that everyone's excited about the rookies. I know that everyone is assuming more growth from Oach. I know that people are like, I've even seen a lot of optimism about THT Dunn, some of these veterans who had kind of fun, plucky seasons or half seasons with the Jazz. Like that's great, but if you're saying to yourself, oh, the Jazz are going to win 45 games because of Ochai Abaji and Chris Dunn, like that to me, that still makes me a little nervous.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. I think having a little bit more of a safety net there in terms of guys who could do it because you've seen them do it over an extended period of time. I think that there's a chance that next year is a step forward competitively again. Keep that pick outside the top 10 so that OKC gets the pick in a butt year, to use Tony Jones's term.
Mhm.
The Jazz get their pick and some others in 2025, and then keep that multi-way pick swap live for 2026 because it could yield something really interesting. So it's feeling increasingly like that's the plan and the vision here. And now it's up to John Collins and some other dudes to see if they can make it happen. So um well, I know we're over the hour now, so we didn't hit the record, but that was like several minutes just to talk about why we're not going to talk more in depth about a topic, which is another hallmark of the Clayton brothers.
Uh-huh.
Um, any other last thoughts, reactions, subtweets, things you want to push out into the universe before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think it still may be a record, even if we, take a minute or two to close this
Yeah,
off. I am going to
probably
uh,
true.
I am going to create kind of a walk through the Jazz current cap sheet, probably in the next couple of days. So listeners slash viewers can watch for that. Probably better for viewers because I will share my cap sheet screen and walk through player by player, just so you're up to speed on what's going on. We've talked about a lot of these details with some of these players, but I'm going
Yeah,
to go through player by player, so you kind of have a reference point, which then moves will happen over the weekend, and some of that will probably become irrelevant. But you'll be prepared for whatever news you hear starting on the afternoon, Friday afternoon. June 30th is now when the floodgates are released instead of midnight.
yep, yeah, yep. All right. Well, we look forward to that, Ken. We'll have free agency stuff coming this weekend. We have some more. We have some more cooking at Salt City Hoops. We'll talk about soon in terms of just getting some alumni back involved and kind of writing more regularly for you as we head into a really interesting Jazz off season. So More to come on that, but for now, this has been a Salt City Hoops video podcast again, whatever the hell we call it. Thank you so much for listening. We'll have more for you as the Jazz march on in this pivotal off season. Thanks for joining us.
Right.